You are listening to My Little Narcissist. I'm your host, Lyra Stone, and I am right now about to, yep, there it goes, light a candle. This is actually a pillar candle that I got at a local grocery store. It's white and kind of surrounded by glass and pretty affordable. And you can find a lot of these types of candles at grocery stores, usually in the Latino section. There are also taquerias you can go to find these candles. And if you're really strapped for cash and looking for a bargain, Dollar General is one of the kind of secret gold mines, I think I would call it, for candle shopping. But before I get into kind of why I am harping so much on candles, and we're going to go into various candles, we're going to go into tea lights, we're going to go into pillar candles, and we're going to go into these little 4-inch skinny candles that I just kind of refer to as ultra candles. But that'll come a little later. I just want to first kind of dive into what this podcast is about. Hi, I'm Lyra Stone. This is My Little Narcissist. And this is a podcast that is focused predominantly on self-care and healing from narcissistic abuse or abuse in general. My personal story I'll sometimes go into, but more or less I want to make this focus about you. I do not really like to go into the psychology of narcissistic persons or abusive persons. I find that to be counterproductive for the point of this podcast. I do believe that usually the way that at least my recovery has worked, and I've seen with various other women and men's recovery and how that's worked with them, it seems like usually when you are starting to figure it out, when things are starting to really click in as you are trying to leave someone who's abusive. And, it's funny if you're an outsider, because outsiders will be like, well, couldn't you tell? Isn't it obvious somebody's abusive? Yes. On one hand, very much yes. It's hard to say it's anything else if it is, if a person is, say, physically abusing you. I myself was physically and sexually abused, on top of course, mentally and emotionally abused for almost a decade by my life partner. So that's my backstory. But obviously I knew what was happening was abuse. However, I was so conditioned and programmed by love, by hope, by childhood, by various things, by empathy, to sort of ignore those situations and keep enduring them in lieu of perhaps him healing or him thanking me or him eventually, recovering and getting better, because abuse victims often go through a lot of psychological torment. A big one for me was cognitive dissonance and, not being able to wrap my mind around this really nice, kind person, this person I fell in love with, that I share really beautiful memories with, this person I've spent family Thanksgiving with, who I know his mother intimately and who is goofy and has all these hobbies and who I very much had entangled my entire life in. There's that person. And then there's, of course, the person who is inebriated, the person who is breaking things, the person who is spitting on me and forcing me into doing things that I do not consent to. And, it can be very difficult kind of reconciling these two persons. And oftentimes victims will then just kind of take the good person, the good one, the kind of Jekyll, so to speak, versus the Hyde, and sort of make excuses for the bad person. And biochemically or chemically, we end up trauma bonded. And trauma bonding is kind of like, I think more people know the word Stockholm Syndrome. And I know Stockholm Syndrome can make people very confused, or like, how can you become bonded to the person that kidnapped you? Well, because it's kind of similar. It's because, can you just imagine, I don't know, in this Stockholm scenario, you're tied in the basement and you've just had your face bashed in. All these horrible things are happening. Where's my mom? I'm so scared. And then say this guy comes in, this person, and he's nice to you, and he brings you food, and he cleans your face, and he helps you. Now, obviously, he's a part of the kidnapping group, or obviously maybe he was the person doing it to you, but you're so relieved to be given care, to be given kindness, because you didn't think you'd ever get it again. You bond to the very person that did it to you. It is really twisted, but it is also a completely normal scientific chemical reaction in your brain. And that's unfortunate for those who have been in abuse, because if this happens to you, this kind of scenario, maybe not, quite so dramatic, but something like that, where a person is really, really bad to you, but then they also come back the next day and they're very nice to you and comforting to you. This can cause an almost unbreakable bond. And so when people try to get out, because either the abuser is so bad because they'll keep getting worse that they're afraid for their lives, or the abuser is now bored with them, because a lot of times they get really sick. People in abuse, obviously their health deteriorates. Like, spoiler alert, this does not do well for your blood pressure. And for women, they have autoimmune issues typically. And, men, I'm sure it would be more heart conditions and things of that nature. But anyway, usually once you just kind of show signs of breaking down or signs of resisting, they're going to discard you or they're going to kill you. And regardless, it's never going to be a happy ending to get out. But if you're out, welcome. And that's where I'm kind of, once again, going to reiterate, this is a podcast about recovery from abuse and finding self-forgiveness and self-care and being in a like-minded community. I am going to focus on, I think, a lot of persons who have been targeted by abusers or who have been very tragically conditioned by abusers. And I'm going to just call them empathetic people or empathic people. Empathic people are the most healing, kindest, most needed persons in this world. Without empaths, without people who can understand the feelings of others and be there for other people, on the levels they do, we would be a very broken world. They are some of the most wonderful people. I think any of our spiritual leaders, like say Jesus Christ or, Buddha, they would probably, if we did like a scan or whatever, or ask them a few questions, I'm sure they would ping as empathic, very empathic. And, my belief is that the more empathy you practice, the closer you are to God. And the irony and the horror is that people who are empathic can end up with people who have no empathy, like zero, who are just void of it or very depleted of it. And they're kind of drawn to them anyway, usually very magnetically, because like all empaths, they can see the broken person underneath the facade, underneath the facade's facade even, because with narcissistic people, you've got the facade, then you've got the facade of this facade, and then you've got the actual broken child, the person that will never, unfortunately, heal. They are, it's really tragic. They are unhelpable. Not to be dramatic, but the scene in Harry Potter, where, Harry is dead briefly, and he's in the platform. I'm sorry if these are spoilers. I figure since Harry Potter's been out for, 20 years or something, it's okay to give spoilers. But when he and Dumbledore are observing kind of Voldemort in this afterlife area, seeing what he has become through, tearing his soul apart 7 times through all the horrific acts he's done, Harry feels disgust but also pity. And Dumbledore says, we just simply cannot help him. And Dumbledore says that. And this is the afterlife. And he's like, some people just are not helpable. He made his choice. And even so, Harry feels great pity for the man. Well, I've often viewed abusive, narcissistic people in a similar light. Like their souls are like that twisted, gnarly, gross, disgusting, but pitiable looking creature that has just been so twisted and so like monstrously distorted by, one could argue, their choices. And how even if you do want to help them, and empathetic people will sometimes help these people for 20 years, 30 years. Like it is really tragic, because in my mind, empathetic people should be shared with the world, and everybody who is in the world should benefit from these healers. And when a narcissistic person comes along, they will hoard that energy and stifle that energy and kind of keep it for themselves. And that's even more tragic, because empathetic people are meant to, I believe, shine in this world. And so I guess the whole point is that, yes, the magnetism of narcissism and empathy is very, very strong. And ironically, I do believe that the bond between the two of them it can be just as addictive to both of them. Like usually, a lot of times when you're with abusive people, a narcissistic person, they can kind of throw you away willy-nilly. You would never expect it because it can really shock you. But, it can be very hard for them to leave an empath. It can be very hard for them to give up that supply. The addictive quality of something that has more of a longevity to it than, say, other supply it's just really hard to pass that up because empathetic people are so good at regenerating and regrowing, like kind of like the limbs that they hack away from them, because they can be the narcissist's conscience. They can feel the narcissist's feelings, and they can really regulate the narcissist. Not that the narcissist wants them to, because in the narcissist's mind, he or she is perfect. But being with an empathetic person or an empath really kind of keeps them pretty stable. Like they can definitely attain, I think, a lot more success, a lot more leveling out when they're with an empathetic person. But that does not mean that they won't end up invariably doing the same things. They always will. When you only focus on yourself, you have no conscience, no brake to kind of pull when you become toxic to your loved ones. They don't have that. All they do is they are all about their self-interest. And self-interest is it. It's just whatever they can get, whatever they want. And things like compassion or things like things like compassion, for example, or empathy, all those things, anything that prevents them or bars them from what they want, they just see that as weakness. They don't even see it as a strength. They don't even believe it exists. They think that people make it up because they're weak. And so they're really sick people. I will definitely say that. It was always fascinating being with my abuser because he was kind of in some ways honest about it. That's the one thing. When you're with a narcissist or an abuser, they usually are pretty honest if you listen to them at the right moments. They're honest about their disorders. They're honest kind of about how they don't feel for other people, how they don't have a conscience, so to speak. They'll tell you that. It might take a while. You may have to be patient with it, and you may have to actually be listening. I know a lot of us tend to kind of override or rewrite what a person says if it doesn't match what we think they are. And, we all have this tendency of sort of putting on blinders, rose-colored glasses, especially with the ones we love, and so we may not even hear it, but they usually will tell on themselves. But I feel like I'm off track. What I really wanted to focus on today was this is a podcast about empathy and about narcissistic recovery and self-care and helping people who are struggling with getting over, especially the first, I would say, 6 months of kind of recovery from narcissistic abuse. I've only been out, I'll be honest, for a little over a year. And so I am still very much in a healing stage, but I've been doing a lot of research and kind of incorporating in tools and talking to a lot of people. And I really thought this might be good to create, so that, it would be another resource out there for those who are looking and searching, or who have maybe been out for a long time and are just kind of seeking some kind of validation or reassurance that what they experienced was, in fact, what it was. Because, brain fog or just confusion is a huge problem in coming out of abusive relationships. Victims of abuse are very, very confused. They often are blaming themselves for what happened, even though it may not be at all logical. If somebody walked in with the camera and rewound, to these moments, it would seem probably very obvious to an outsider, like, wow, this person is abusive and this person is being abused. But to an abuse victim, it doesn't seem that way at all. Usually they're the ones that feel a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of uncertainty, because nobody's a saint when they are under attack. And there's no way to be a saint when you're under attack. And so if any situation, I think, that has you acting out in ways that isn't like in keeping to your higher self, or maybe to the kind of person you want to be, because we all suffer a little bit from delusions of identity, as far as identifying or thinking that maybe we are better than who we are. And getting out of an abusive relationship, it can in some ways check you as well. Like an abusive relationship can be the most enlightening thing for you. I never would suggest it to anybody on the planet, but it is enlightening once you're out and healed up a bit, because abusers attack every single weakness we have, every single paranoid thought, every single delusional idea, every single personality flaw, every single thing that has ever been wrong with you, or that needs to be healed, or that needs to be fixed. I mean, they're going to exploit that. That's what they do. That's who they are. And while that's incredibly traumatic, they've also literally dug up every single bone in the backyard. And now you have this, in some ways, great gift, because most people have buried these bones for a reason. They've forgotten where they are. I'm using a metaphor. And so it can be a lot of trial and error to dig up bones and to find, these flaws, these areas, these reasons that we are who we are, that we could work on to become better, more spiritually centered, more altruistic people. But thanks to the narcissists and their dog-like personas, they just dig them up for you. And then they, kind of chuck them at your head a lot. And, but once they're out of your life, you're left with a huge amount of information about yourself. And if you don't get overwhelmed by it, because, at first we're going to experience a lot of self-hatred, a lot of shame. Nobody likes to have just stuff ripped out of you and flung in your face in just a complete callous way, which of course they do. They have no empathy. They're not going to be anything but ruthless. But it can also be, if you survive it, and if you're able to kind of find a way to center into some self-love, because like self-love and regulation and confidence is really the first step. That's what you're going to have to then kind of work on those flaws, those things that the narcissist tore you down for. Because, also he's going to exaggerate, or she's going to exaggerate, and she's going to make it all, they're also going to project onto you every bad thing they have. They're going to take bones from their yard. I'm sorry if the metaphor is getting bad. They're going to take bones from their yard and dump it into your garden and say, these are yours too. And so it can be very confusing sussing out all of this. And, it can be almost a lifetime of recovery. But anyway, like one of the steps, though, unfortunately, when you come out of narcissism or come out of abuse, you are left very depleted and usually feeling unsafe. You have a lot of flashbacks, a lot of CPTSD. You can be extremely depressed, extremely hypervigilant, extremely anxious. You could have lost everything, your jobs, your family, your friends, everything to get out. I mean, they take so much. But the first step towards any recovery is finding things that are going to reprogram your mind, that's going to make you feel safe, that's going to give you a sense of safety, or of especially control, because they're very controlling people. Control, in fact, is the number one kind of motivator behind every abuser. They want to control you, and they will not settle until they have control over your entire life, your entire mind, your entire heart, your entire sexuality. Anyway, one of the things that has helped me has been candle work. And I know that some people, when they hear candles, especially men, they might just scoff and go, well, how's that going to help me? When I need to go to Bath and Body Works and get a Sakura candle? Like, no, yes, maybe. Hear me out. Candles are a very powerful physical representation or symbol that you can use to ground and center yourself. And I'm a witchy person, so they have additional symbolic reasons for me that I think anybody can benefit from. You don't have to be very spiritual to get spirituality. And even if you do resist, say, witchcraft, which is what I'll be diving into, there's still such a psychological effect for it that if you just suspend your disbelief, it will get you to where you need to go. Because unfortunately, when we leave narcissistic abuse, we are so battered. We are typically so lost. We don't have anything left inside of us. It's very much like a vampire has just sucked out our soul. And so we need to oftentimes really draw from an exterior source. It's almost like you're so battered, you have to draw from a spiritual source, something out there. And this can be hard for atheists. This can be hard for people who are secular, just kind of not really into spiritual stuff. Because, while I'm never going to denigrate or refute, very sound, rational arguments, there is no way, in some ways, to definitively prove in the levels of understandings we have about matter or the senses, the concept of God. I could probably not convince you Aphrodite is real, and it would really not be in my interest or desire to. But really, we have to look at what these things represent. And a candle represents self-care and soothing. And beyond that, they have a huge spiritual significance. I get pillar candles, for example, which I'm looking at right now, and the flame, is going. Pillar candles, especially white pillar candles, have been used throughout a lot of centuries to kind of promote protection and to kind of give you a feeling of setting intentions. And as you look at a pillar candle, you can really start to sort of use that symbol to create a sacredness and a ritual and a space for yourself. Because when we are going through a flashback, when we are kind of being hit with a CPTD experience, you have this object in front of you that can act as a conduit for self-care. And I also find that herbs and oils have an amazing soothing quality to them, not just on a spiritual level, but also scientifically. Lavender, for example, is going to soothe you. That's already been proven emphatically, like chamomile has. And so you can take a candle like a lavender candle with good infusions. I use Village candles. Yankee, of course, is good. But you can get some of those. You can always go on Etsy. And the aroma, the aromatics, is incredibly therapeutic. And if you can get past some of the prejudice or the pushing away of this is something maybe a housewife does or my mom did, and really understand what this kind of affordable thing can do for you, it's so much more than just a smell and a fire. It is witchcraft. It is a way to spiritually ground and center yourself. I love to go to, hold on. I love to go to Art of the Root. Art of the Root is my favorite kind of witchy brand that I use. Art of the Root is found on Amazon or on the internet, and it's a very herbal spiritual store where the people that make these products, they use infusions to help you with your intentions, and you can get candles for pretty much anything. Like I love, and the aromatics are amazing. These are very quality candles, soy products, organic, things of that nature. I love, there's like a money drawing candle, and it's green, and you can get it in a pillar or kind of a smaller one. And they have things like vanilla in them or things like cinnamon in them, but things that have been kind of spiritually in herb lore and kind of folklore and witch lore that are supposed to kind of promote and draw in wealth. And additionally, you have oils that you can purchase, good luck oil or oils like come hither oil if you want to maybe go out on a date and give yourself a little boost of confidence. And these are also infused and delicious smelling with floral scents and things, that plants that have been ascribed to do these spiritual things. And I found them very successful. But beyond the success, I found the psychology behind it to be very helpful. when you are going through something that is undefinable, I feel like, again, if you're kind of taking more of a rational, secular, psychological approach to things, grief, pain, loss, these emotions are not really something you can ascribe a simple statement to, a rational approach to. They are not really going to be eased or conquered through the rational, because they're complex. And so that is where the spiritual realm has always come in. And the spiritual realm does a really good job, because once we get into thought patterns, because when we are stuck in a loop, a lot of us get stuck in obsessive loops. And we are in a flashback and we just can't escape. This is what he did, and I can't believe this happened, and I'm always going to be this way, and how am I going to survive this? And we become so debilitated and anxious. And, our thought loops, they can become our reality. They can become our identity. They can become habits. And when we've gone through abuse for, say, 10 years, we have a lot of conditioning we have to uncondition. And doing it through an exterior way, through lighting a candle with herbs and intentions, you are at the very least giving yourself hope and giving yourself focus. You're looking outside of yourself and into a future or into the present, but at least not so much in the past. Or at least if you are in the past, you have kind of some productive method or approach to getting the past healed a bit. A lot of people suffer from helplessness. A lot of them suffer from rage, because usually abusive people are the ones that get away. We do not have a fair justice system. The world does not, I'm in the States, we don't have a very good justice system for things like domestic abuse or things like rape. We just don't. We are still, as a society and culturally, working on those things. And abusive people get away with stuff all the time. And they usually do because people are so uneducated about it, and people are so ignorant about what is actually going on and what it's actually like. Hence why these podcasts and these videos and these forums are so incredibly important, because the more people understand and know, and also that this is out there. This is way more common, I think, than they realize. And more importantly, that it can happen to them, because a lot of people like to be separated from it. They like to say, oh, well, that stinks for you. I guess you had some weird childhood trauma, if they're being nice, or I guess you were weak, or I guess you were naive. I mean, there's a lot of victim blaming, and we all know that. And it's like, I think a lot of that comes from the very real fear that they don't want it to happen to them, or they don't believe it could happen to them. They want to believe that there's a way to avoid this. And what really needs to be, I think, taught is that no, that's not true. Abusers can attach to any number of persons. And, narcissistic persons are incredibly skilled at doing this. No one is the exception. No one is going to be immune, by and large, to an abusive person coming into their life. I mean, there are certainly things you can do, but again, I feel like what people think that they can do isn't what can actually be done to prevent an abusive person from wrecking their life. And a lot of it comes down to things like self-care and kind of shoring up those flaws, the tendency towards, say, codependency. A lot of us have a tendency towards codependency, and even if you didn't, after leaving an abuser, you definitely have codependency issues, because abusers will not let you not be codependent, especially if it's a narcissistic person. Codependency, especially with, say, covert narcissism, they're codependent, and so they will not let you have healthy boundaries, healthy space, all those. It's not going to happen. You will end up in that toxic pattern, and now you need to get outside of it. And candle work is a great way to do that. I would strongly suggest you check out Art of the Root. I think it has amazing products, and it can really help you if, like, you just need something to hold on to, some hope to hold on to, especially when you feel out of control, like you don't have control. it might seem silly, it might seem wooey, but, even if it is placebo, even if kissing a boo-boo isn't going to actually make it better, it does make it better, at least for the 6-year-old that had the boo-boo kissed. And taking a oil that is intended for manifestation and positive attraction, and putting that on a candle and lighting the candle and maybe writing an intention under that candle, like, I hope to manifest really supportive people in my life, and put that under the candle, and then just sit with it and put your mind and your intentions into making that happen. It at least makes you feel like it's more attainable, like you are no longer swimming in a sea of helplessness. And whether or not, Aphrodite or Hecate or whomever you maybe even want to call to help maybe with the candles, a lot of people pray and ask for their spirit guides or just exterior forces to aid and assist them. Other people don't. It's your own methods. Even if, like, say, they're just symbols, they're just ideas, or maybe they are actual entities, it's entirely about what you choose to identify. Because what I like about witchiness and spiritual witchiness is that it's very much designed to help the individual and whatever she or he feels connected to. You are the magic, you are the spiritual, you are the creator of this change in your life. And it teaches you to trust yourself. It teaches you to trust your energy. And it teaches you to kind of bring back some of that confidence that maybe you lost. And also it helps you rearrange your focus. So sitting with a candle, and you can find all sorts of candles. A lot of people, I think, worry about costs because candles can be expensive. To get a village candle, I have an amazing one inside. It's a lemon candle. I like citrus. It's very energizing. And it's not quite so floral. I don't often like the really, really, really floral brands, but, it has lemongrass in it, and it has a lot of really high-end, very nice aromatics to it, but it costs probably about $20, and some people can't really swing $20. Maybe that's a bit too much, and so there are other options out there. Again, I would suggest going to the Dollar General would be a great kind of cheat code for candles if you want them to be scented. And if you do want to do more witchy stuff, and you're very poor, tea lights is a great alternative. You can buy those in a bag for $100. And a tea light can be just as helpful, and it only burns for maybe an hour, and it'll give you, kind of the space to then do your intentions and your focus. There's also, I call them altar candles, and they're about 4 inches long, and they come in various different colors. And in kind of witchcraft or the spiritual world, colors are very powerfully representative of things. Like pink is representative of self-care. Red is representative of lust and also of kind of self-empowerment. Green, obviously wealth, fortune, good luck. Black is about kind of banishment or baneful works. And I'm never going to criticize a person for wanting to do baneful work. I think that when we've been really hurt and there's a lot of poison inside of us and pain inside of us, sometimes it can be very therapeutic to want to send that poison and pain back to the person who gave it to you. I'm not going to ever discredit somebody for that. I won't ever say you're wrong for doing it. I will say, however, that we become what we focus on. And if you become really caught up in that toxicness, keep in mind that abuse, abuse can be contagious, and it can actually latch onto you. 1 in 4 girls are sexually abused before they're 18, 1 in 6 for boys. These are really ugly numbers. And abuse happens in a very common way, often in our childhoods and even in our adulthood, obviously. And scientists or studies have been conducted, and they've kind of concluded that about 1 in 3 of these abuse cases Like, those people go on to become abusers themselves, and they continue that cycle. And, it can seem very mind-boggling to the victims of abuse. Like, why would you ever want to inflict what we experienced onto someone else? Well, I think a part of that comes from the toxicness, the poison that's inside of you, the wanting to punish, to kind of just recreate it, but then be the one that's in power over it. And so you have to be careful when you do baneful, because if you are just so caught up in that bitterness, that resentment, how dare, I'm never going to have that happen to me again. I will, fight somebody before it ever happens. That's good. Like, you should have a fighting spirit, and you should definitely put down solid boundaries. And you should be like, yes, if somebody, tries to violate me again, I will not stand for it. But everything really has to be balanced out, and you have to also have self-forgiveness, and you have to have healing, and your focus should be on you, not on them. And reacting to the abuser, even when she or he is gone, doesn't necessarily help in the long run. I believe in vindication. I believe that we can see justice for what the abusers did. And I believe abusers should be held accountable. But you cannot hold anyone accountable when you are still broken. People who are abuse victims often, most of us, will talk about how, with all the gaslighting, all the crazy making, all the keeping quiet about the abuse. And the really sick part is abusers are perpetual victims. So while you might be keeping quiet, not telling people what's going on because maybe you're protecting them, or maybe you're hoping it's going to stop, they, on the other hand, if they sense that you're pulling away, they're instantly going to go out and start saying to everybody, oh no, she's the problem, or he's the problem. No, you don't understand. I'm just a victim. And, they won't tell you, but that's how abusers think. It's like, no matter what, you are the problem. They are innocent. And that can be very traumatic, especially if you've experienced very violent crimes, to kind of hear the person that's done it to you say it's your fault, or say it didn't happen, minimize it. And it's very common, unfortunately, and it really re-traumatizes people, and worse, systemically, because people will side with the abuser. It can really cause suicide. It can cause massive depression. It's kind of one of those things where they won't believe you till you're dead. And this is really so sadly true. But one of the first steps you have to make as you're recovering is the very real and very solid realization of, this isn't about them. You don't need to convince anyone of what happened to you. What you need to do is focus solely on yourself and your recovery, and get your brain right and your emotions right, so that maybe a year from now or 2 years from now, after you've done the therapy, you've lit your candles, you've put those intentions down, you've found the meditative space to stay calm, centered, and feel safe and regain some control. After you've done this work for long enough, you will start to feel less afraid, less offensive, less like you are having to justify your pain. And when you reach that point, I've often found, because there's a big if there, if you still feel like your abuser needs to be held accountable, your abuser needs to see justice, maybe then there's something you can do about it. And I really think nobody can answer that for you when you reach that point. I think some people, once they've healed, they no longer feel animosity or hatred or much of anything towards the abuser, maybe some pity, but they're so relieved to be kind of healed and maybe even on a more enlightened and better path. Like, that's what you're looking for. That's what we're hoping for. We are here for each other and for our own empathy and healing and light to shine through. Because while what happened to us is unforgivable and traumatic and messed up, what we do with it is our responsibility. And I think when we make that very conscious decision to take that pain and use it for good, use it to help destigmatize the victim story, to offer a platform for more women and men to come forward and have a dialogue in a safe place, to find transformative healing and maybe even justice. Because while we may not have got justice, there, as more information comes out, maybe they will. Or maybe it'll be easier for them to get out and they won't have to go through the misogyny or the cultural barriers that kept them in these circumstances for so long. And, as victims of it who've hopefully come out the other side, we can also go into all sorts of arenas for care and healing, because it's usually, sadly, persons who've been through a lot of pain and who have conquered that pain that can be the most impactful and helpful to other people and can really be the spiritual healers that we need as a society. And again, that is the crappiest way to reach it. I think that people can reach that path through far less traumatic situations, but that's unfortunately not what happened to us. And so now we make choices and we light a candle. And I really strongly believe you should try lighting candles. Suspend disbelief, go out, get some altar candles. You can find that at most witchy places or crystal stores. You can also find them online, like pretty easily. Probably just type in altar candles and they'll pop up. And you can really just through the act of spiritual ritual, I think, arrive at a much better place in your mind, in your heart, and find that there's a lot of strength that can be drawn from it. And I'm really like here, with COVID and whatnot, I kind of had to practice a lot of self-care very much inside my home. I wasn't able to, go out and seek out resources as much. It had to be at my house. And so these methods have been stuff that has gotten me through. It was kind of interesting that the world joined me in my trauma and introspection. It's a very odd time for abuse recovery to hit, I have to tell you. But this was one of the kind of gentle methods I learned, because I know for a lot of people, they're usually so anxious and so broken down. For me, after my assault and rape, I couldn't feed myself. I could barely leave my bed for a very long time. I was deeply, deeply, deeply traumatized. And if it wasn't for the intervention of some friends and things, who knows? So I'm very familiar with how bad it can be. And even off of my extreme, just the discard of a narcissist, just when an abuser, is abusing you, you're fighting, you have this bond, and then they just sever it, and usually they're already cheating. Usually they've moved on to other prey. And it's just like, you cease to exist. Discards are actually one of the most painful feelings of betrayal, you feel completely, I don't know what the word is, abandoned, but also like just confused because what they do is so outside of normal human logic. And what's worse is it's this unfortunate realization that you have of you're never going to get closure from that person. That person was never going to give you love, was never going to say they were sorry, was never going to admit what they were doing to you. And it can just be overwhelming. And people can end up, almost comatose, so deep in their depression, so deep in their anxiety, so messed up from their hypervigilance, from constantly being on eggshells around a person who made your energy, your mind, everything about them. There was not a moment where you could just relax and be present with yourself because they were so insistent everything be centered around them. And that's a lot to suddenly just be like, on the other side, and now you're with yourself again. You don't even know who you are anymore because you had everything stripped away from you. Everything you loved, everything that you were proud of is gone because this person has just mowed it over and betrayed you and often abused you. And it's a lot. And so finding something nearby, I find really helps. Something that is simple, something that's not going to require a lot of money or a lot of energy. And candles, you can get anywhere. And you can even just order if you don't even want to go out of your house. or if you're, say, in quarantine. And these oils, these candles, they can really help at least get what you're trying to do internally in an external environment. And the ritual and the practice really can see significant changes in your state of being and state of mind as you start to kind of verbalize and say what it is you want. Because getting to the place where you're like, this is what I want. And these candles, this flame, this smell, this herb is going to get me there. And, the spiritual belief in things is powerful. I have lots of spiritual beliefs in my candles. I do believe in them. The money drawing candle I have, the uncrossing candle I have. I believe in those herbs. I believe in that magic. And that belief that the universe is going to help, it's going to aid, it's going to create, it's going to provide this space is very transformative. It gives me hope. And, so far, it's been successful. It's been completely it's transformed my whole life, and it's made me believe in magic personally, in my own personal life. And again, it's kind of like, if everything's in your head, well, then everything's in your head. And what does it matter if it's psychological or spiritual, if it's happening? And so if you need a leg up, if you're just kind of like me, sort of was scraping around, trying to find something to hold on to, especially because coming out is very isolating. It's very lonely. You can try to hold and latch on to people and be like, hey, help me, please. But essentially nobody can do this journey for you. Only you can. And they're not going to understand. And I think abandoning, so to speak, the desire to get people to understand is an incredible first step. Because we spent so many of our years, of our energy, of our time, trying to get our abuser to understand what they were doing was abusive. And it was fruitless. And because we knew what he was doing was abusive, or what she was doing was abusive. We didn't need that confirmation. We knew in our hearts it was that way. And I believe that as we move forward with the understanding that we are kind of our own rescuers. We rescue ourselves. Nobody can understand it. Nobody needs to understand it. Because when you're solid in who you are, and you are connected to who you are, and you know emphatically that this isn't about them anymore, and it never was about them. All of a sudden, having people quote unquote believe you, having people it's irrelevant. You don't need them to believe you. It happened. You need to start believing in yourself and just get to the place where that surety, because a lot of times we are not sure. Like, we're sure, we know the abuser was abusing us, but we're not sure about our guilt and our shame and the blame that we feel, and because they gaslit us for so long and said it wasn't a big deal. We're not sure how to convey that. We don't feel entitled to say that. When I think on the levels of abuse I experienced, and then the minimization of that abuse, and how much of it I sort of accepted. And I was like, well, okay, that doesn't make any sense, but I could be wrong, because this is a normal human thing. We typically regulate, we check. When somebody we love says, hey, that's not the real reason, we listen, and then we compromise with it. But of course, abusive people, they're lying to you. Their whole agenda and interest is their self-interest, and they'll say to you whatever needs to be said just to make the conversation end, or just to get to the sex, or just to get what they need and they want. And that's awful, because it's not normal, and it is crazy making. And anyway, sitting with that and understanding that you're going to be probably very isolated. You're going to be very alone for a very long time. And that's okay. That's why you have the candles, because you need to do that internal work. If you want to have healthy relationships, long-term, sustainable relationships, because maybe you didn't even have those before. Maybe you thought you did, but it turns out you didn't, because a lot of times you lose relationships when you leave an ex, when you leave an abuser. You can now have a chance to rebuild yourself, which also means rebuilding your relationships. Once you become solid in who you are, for example, you're not going to be able to tolerate people who are one-sided. If you stop being, say, a people pleasers often end up with abusers. Well, if you stop doing that, all of a sudden, those relationships you had that were kind of built around your kind of feeling of obligation to do things you don't actually want to do, well, when that's gone, so will very likely that relationship be. Relationships are built around our boundaries and what we say about ourselves and what we enforce about ourselves. And good people, kind people, loving people, they're going to be there for that. And they're going to support that because, and they are out there. I think a lot of people get very cynical and bitter and go on to become abusers themselves because they start to believe this is just simply how it is. Well, I've been abused since I was 6, and all these nasty, ugly people are around me, and maybe this just is, so I should just join the party. Well, no, it's not true. There are amazing people out there, loving people out there, kind people out there, so many, it blows my mind. You may not be interacting with them because you are trapped in a circle of toxic energy. But you can get out of it at any time, just like that candle. Anyway, you were listening to My Little Narcissist. I'm your host, Lyra Stone, and I hope you have a great day and that you take some of this to heart and that it helped.